Good evening, everybody. My name's Katrina Gill, and I'm one of the trustees of the Froebel Trust. And I would like to warmly welcome everyone who's joining us this evening. I can see people from all sorts of different places across the UK, from Nigeria, the USA, and I'm sure from lots and lots of other places. So welcome. Unity and connection is an underpinning principle of a Froebelian approach. So I would like to invite you to say hello to each other in the chat and keep saying hello and share and contribute to the discussion as we go through this evening. So my job tonight is to briefly introduce both the Froebel Trust and our speakers, Professor Alison Clark and Donna Green. Now, many of you will be very familiar with the Froebel Trust, but many of you will be new to our work. So let me first start by saying a little bit about what we do. The Froebel Trust is a charity which funds practice development and research into education and learning in the early years of childhood from birth to 8. All of our work is underpinned by the principles and ideas of Friedrich Froebel, who was, of course, the inventor of the term kindergarten and a pioneer of early childhood education. Our aim is to ensure that Froebelian principles are recognised, understood, valued and practiced to ensure high quality early childhood education and care for the youngest members of our society. And this evening's lecture brings together the two sides of our work, research and practice, which should not be two separate things, but be mutually interactive. So tonight we're going to hear about time for children, time for their play, and time for learning. We're going to hear about the Froebel Trust funded research project, Slow Knowledge, and the Unhurried Child, from both a research and a practice perspective. So I'm absolutely delighted tonight to introduce our speakers. Firstly, Dr. Alison Clark, Professor of Early Childhood Education at the University of Southeastern Norway and Early Childhood Consultant based in what I believe is a very snowy Orkney and cold up in Scotland. And Alison is a widely published early childhood academic who, together with Professor Peter Moss, developed the Mosaic approach as a way of listening to and engaging with young children's views and experiences. And her study, Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, was funded by the Froebel Trust and published by Routledge. And this book was named Professional Book of the Year in the Nursery World Awards 2023. So Alison is also engaged with research with practitioners about slow practices in early childhood education and care in Scotland, in Norway, Iceland, and Japan. And in addition, Alison is also a practicing artist. We're also joined tonight by Donna Green, who is head of Woodlands Early Learning and Childcare Centre in Falkirk in Scotland. And Donna has worked in early years for over 30 years, and she's the founder and one of the leaders of the Falkirk Froebel Network. In 2021, Donna achieved her Master's in Education, Early Childhood Practice and Froebel, where her collaboration with Alison began, with her dissertation research exploring slow pedagogy through a Froebelian lens. In 2022, Donna led a Froebel Trust grant-funded collaboration project implementing slow pedagogy through Froebelian principled practice within a number of early years settings in Falkirk. And Donna has also published a chapter in the Bloomsbury Handbook to Friedrich Froebel, which was published in 2023. In addition to hearing about their work tonight, we're also celebrating the publication of a new Froebel Trust pamphlet co-authored by Alison and Donna called Time for Childhood, Slow Pedagogy. And this is available free to download from the Froebel Trust website. Now, I know you're not here to hear from me, but before I hand over to Alison and Donna, I would just like to let you know that there's going to be an opportunity for you to ask questions at the end. And as I'm sure you'll be aware by now, the chat moves very, very quickly. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A function within the Zoom call, as then we'll be able to see your questions as they come in. And of course, you don't need to wait until the end to ask your question, but you can add it to the Q&A at any time. So now let me hand over to Alison and to Donna.
Thank you very much, Katrina, for that lovely introduction. And it's a huge honour to be giving the Froebel Annual Lecture this evening with Donna on the subject of time for children.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure. I'm just going to echo what Alison was saying there also. It's lovely to be here with you all this evening, and a real privilege to be invited to give the Froebel Annual Lecture alongside Alison as well.
And what Donna didn't know, that I was going to say what a privilege it's been to work with Donna, and I've learned so much, but that wasn't in our script. So our lecture will be in 3 parts. In the first part of this talk, I would like to give some thought as to why the subject of the relationship with time has attracted such interest now. And then just to follow by a brief summary of some of the key features of a slow pedagogy. And to give just a taste of some of the ongoing conversations that I have been having, thinking about early childhood education and care through a slow lens. But this can only be a glimpse of the deep thinking that is happening in many contexts and countries.
And moving on, I will share a brief overview of my slow pedagogy journey, discuss making connections to Froebelian principle practice through a slow lens, and move on to share some examples of Froebelian slow pedagogy and the difference this is making in early childhood nursery settings.
And then I'm going to end with some closing thoughts. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. I wanted to begin with this quote. And it's from a study carried out by Jackie Cousins in the late 1990s. Jackie's book that she wrote was called Listening to 4-Year-Olds, How They Can Help to Plan Their Education and Care. And this is a boy talking about his favorite construction toy. And he told Jackie, well, I never play with it here. You see, it takes long to make all the little houses, and they've got these really little nails, and I really like it. But when I build a house, it takes me a long time, and then I've got to break it up, and it's tidy up time. I learned so much from Jackie's work, her lifetime as a Froebelian, particularly in her study about 4-year-olds, and the insights it gave into young children's relationship with time, and the impact of some of the institutional approaches to time in early childhood education and care, and the impact that can have on young children's lives. The impact it can have on what is possible for children to do, and also what it prevents children from doing. So considering time for children is about making such decisions explicit and making more opportunities for play to happen, as Froebel advocated. So talking about time, why is there an increasing interest in this now? There are many causes, and this is a big subject, but I think a major one for me has been the pandemic. I'm not apologetic, I'm unapologetic about still talking about the pandemic and the longer term impact on children and families and on those who work with young children. I think it has had a powerful legacy, and we have yet to understand the longer term impact on the younger generation, on the youngest generation. But the early indications are that time to develop social, emotional, and language skills through play have become even more important. Discussions about slow pedagogies are not a magic answer, but they do offer a way of standing up for and reclaiming a less hurried way of engaging with young children that values deep engagement, listening, and play. And then the pandemic has also had a lasting impact on those who work with young children, compounded by the increasing economic pressures in a low-wage sector. There are indications internationally about increasing levels of reported burnout among early childhood educators and problems with both recruitment and retention. So this growing interest in seeking alternative narratives there is, I believe, a desire to reclaim a saner, more satisfying, and even joyful way of working with young children. I think this is most evident in countries where early childhood practice has become more accelerated, hurried, and fast forward, driven by targets and a focus on the easy to measure. There is little opportunity to pause. I took this photograph outside a school near Melbourne in Australia recently. Wait a while, it said, which made me think. Waiting, this reminds us of the importance of creating pause for reflection and observation, despite the structures and pressures that make this increasingly difficult. So, slow pedagogies, here's a brief summary of the key features. The Froebel Trust funded my 2-year study that began in 2020, called Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child, to conduct an exploratory study into the relationship with time in early childhood education and care, set against the background of a speeded up world, taking as one of my inspirations the slow movement that began in the 1980s around thinking about a different relationship with food, a less hurried relationship. So the key features of slow pedagogies emerge from my reading and in-depth interviews with 20 early childhood researchers, teacher educators, and educators across 11 countries. So a slow pedagogy can involve the following features. Being with, so being attentive to the rhythm of the children and adults and materials you're working with. And both Donna and I will be saying more about this. It also involves rapid, intense moments, as well as a slowing down of pace. Because the concept of slow is about giving full attention. So this can involve children's opportunities for very fast things such as dancing and singing and running and seeing their ideas take flight. But it's about that attention. It also makes time for listening and collaboration, and celebrates the group as well as the individual. Such working together can take time to develop and is harder to assess, but is such a valuable life skill. Slow pedagogies also value play and the present moment, this full immersion and the chance for children to experience what Harriet Cafaro has called stretched time, this unfragmented time. And then it's about taking the long view, cultivating over time. It values the difficult to measure and seeks to enable deep discovery and strengthen relationships. And in some of the countries in which I've been working, talking around the importance of deep actually has more significance than using the word slow. And then there is these interconnecting themes that emerged and have been developed further in subsequent projects with educators. So these 4 key themes of being with, going off track and diving deep, and taking the longer view. So I've been thinking, well, what is it? What is so relevant now about these particular themes? Being with, I think, it's this opportunity, as one of my participants, Sylvia Kind, remarked, to be with children, to be with colleagues, to be with materials and ideas. And a word I've heard most often in discussion about slow pedagogy with educators has been permission. Permission to prioritize and value time spent with children whilst acknowledging the other demands on their time. And then going off track and diving deep with children, which supports practice that is in contrast to the heavily scripted curricula that limits children's explorations to adult-led activities, and what Stephen Ball has referred to as the shallowness of neoliberal education. And taking the long view invites a way of working that is able to make decisions based on longer-term values rather than the urgency of the always short term. Taking the long view also connects with concerns about sustainability and the future of our planet. This is another important strand that is adding to the interest in thinking through a slow lens. So, what's been happening? This brief summary will only be a glimpse of some of the different ways discussion about slow pedagogies has been growing over the past couple of years. I'm mentioning briefly some initiatives that I've been directly involved in or seen myself, but there are many others, and I can see there are colleagues on this call, which is fantastic, who have played a big role. Please add to the discussion in the chat. So in terms of teaching, there is now, for example, a module as part of the Froebel Masters at the University of Edinburgh, based on my book on the study Slow Knowledge and the Unhurried Child. And the course is led by my colleague, Lynn McNair. So in terms of research, here is just one example of several ongoing international slow pedagogy projects that I'm involved in. This is a project based in Iceland, with my colleagues Anna Magna, Rensdottir, Kristen Difford, and a Norwegian colleague, Kari Karlsson. There are 4 preschools involved in the study, and they've each chosen an aspect of every day in early childhood education and care as their starting point for reflecting on how they are currently working with time. This is not a subject that can be forced on colleagues as yet another pressure. It's about creating the opportunities to take a look together and to see what is possible. So the aim of this particular project in Iceland, the educators involved described it as to create an environment for both children and educators to appreciate the rhythms of daily routines and to shed light on strategies for stress reduction, enhance social sustainability and overall well-being of children and educators. So you can see the 2 strands there of thinking about children's well-being, but also educators too. One of the centres chose as the starting point the cloakroom, where children change in and out of their outdoor clothes. And their reflections, one of the educators said, initially the cloakroom was chosen as a key area for introducing slow pedagogy to children aged 2 to 3. It is currently a stressful spot where children are often under much pressure. The aim was to transform the cloakroom, making it a place to foster deeper interactions where children learn how to interact and dress calmly with assistance. And my reflection is that the cloakroom then became, rather than just an in-between time, it was kind of valued as an important part of the day where the educators could kind of relax into it more, not feel like they had to rush through it in order to get the children out or in, but it was valued for itself. And then, having started thinking about the cloakroom, they then decided to look at meal times. So to look at how they could introduce slower practices within their mealtime routines. And so there was a ripple effect where looking through a slow lens has spread from thinking first about one issue to then looking at other practices together. So another example that I'm delighted to be able to mention is a slow pedagogy project that's been happening in Orkney, where I live. And this is the 2nd year of a study here, where educators chose to focus on going deeper with children's learning. And this has also included the 1st year in school classes, the P1 classes. And here's a diagram just to show from one of the settings to show some of their thinking. And I'm really grateful to be able to share this. So a starting point thinking, so how can we free up more time thinking about permission and time to be with? And this led on to questions around the importance of educators feeling they had permission from the leadership team to be with children more. And then to look at reflecting on the timetable, where could they grow more time or use time differently, to look at the natural transitions through the day, and then to think about how to make the most effective use of their staff team. So I'm now going to move on to just a brief example from my most recent visit to Australia. And this is talking about slow in a very different context, and a reminder of how important the local context is for developing these ideas. So this was a slow pedagogical journey happening in Brisbane, and it's based around the educators and children's explorations of one of the native trees in their garden, the cotton tree. And it's an example of stretched time. This project stretched over a year in the life of the cotton tree. So children drew the tree, thought about it. Their comments were copied and displayed and documented outdoors. And one of the things the children became really fascinated with was a little beetle that they found on the tree, a jewel beetle. This is a centre which celebrates the very many different languages, expressive languages of children. And they use sewing, for example, as a thinking tool. And it absolutely connects with one of the projects that Donna and I have been involved in too. So I love their sewing corner. The children had written all the labels for the materials, and on the screen you'll also see their birthday cloak with some absolutely fantastic sewing and printmaking. But they also went on in this project around the cotton tree to make us a jewel beetle dress. It's a great example of how projects can grow, how children can go off track, if you like, can kind of take a project in a very different direction, and then how the educators are kind of running alongside, providing the resources and the time and working alongside the children. It's a great example of an extended project. So starting from that point of how to deepen the relationship with the cotton tree, listening to the children's reflections, documenting it over a year, noticing the children's interest in the beetles, and then the children deciding to make a jewel beetle dress. So this project, I like to think of it, it's meandered from the initial idea through these different processes. So as a counterbalance to an emphasis on acceleration and busyness, I'm interested in what a slow and patient and unhurried early childhood education and care can look like. And this may describe your context at the moment. A slow and patient early childhood education and care makes time, place, and materials to explore what children think through play, creates opportunities to deepen and extend children's learning, including revisiting, makes time to listen to children's ideas and experiences through a range of expressive languages, prioritizes time to listen to multiple perspectives, including those of families and colleagues. Importantly, can also be a place of resistance, unafraid to encounter uncertainty and difference, and to challenge policies that sit uncomfortably with your pedagogical principles. To also be a place where taking the longer view is valued about children's lives, about education and the planet, and that values the here and now, and that pays close attention to the present, whilst recognizing all children's past knowledge and experience that they bring to their setting, and being mindful of their future. So now I'm going to hand over to Donna.
Thank you, Alison. Such rich knowledge, slow knowledge, and examples given there. It was lovely to hear. Now, I'm going to begin by sharing, as I said, a bit about my slow pedagogy journey. It's involved lots of different people, but I think it's really important to learn from the past to inform the present. So initially, as Katrina was saying, that yes, I studied at the University of Edinburgh. My dissertation was around slow pedagogy, and it was about that, how did it link with a Froebelian lens? At the same time, we connected with, and it was very fortunate that my mentor, Dr. Lynn McNair, shared my details with Alison, which led to myself being a participant with Alison's Slow Knowledge and Unhurried Child Focus Group for her Froebel Trust funded research. That moved on, as we've already heard, to enable myself to successfully secure some Froebel Trust grant funding to lead and explore slow pedagogy through the Froebelian Lens project, which involved 3 early learning and childcare settings and Professor Alison Clark. And if you can see in 22, the slide there, up to current day, an example of how this project has continued to be cascaded and shared wider across various Scottish locations. And there were some of them mentioned on the screen there. In addition to this, there has been an amazing amount of positive feedback from the Froebel Trust film that we created, and it's heartening to hear that this is one of the most viewed items on the Froebel Trust website. Also, Alison, could we move to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, just before we do, I'll mention as well a little bit about the project, although Alison touched on it. Currently, we're reconnected and we've got a slow project going on with slow sewing and slow woodwork. And this is in 2 early learning and childcare settings. And alongside the nursery, we've got Alison and Pete Moorhouse, Jane Winnett and Sharon Imrie to really work together for that collaboration to really support and understand how we're being slow with woodwork and sewing in practice. So moving on to this slide, you can see there's a quote on here, and this was a piece of Froebel's original writing that I discovered when I was studying. And I felt it makes really pertinent links with slow pedagogy. And although it was written in 1885, initially I thought we've moved on. However, I believe it's still rooted in our society. And when we were unravelling this through the project work, the findings showed adults were still doing lots to children rather than with. And often, this isn't deliberate, and sometimes they're unconscious biases. But if we don't take the time to slow down and recognise and reflect, the finding shows as educators, we keep doing what we've always done. Can we move on to the next slide, Alison? So here you can see starting with the child, and Froebel advocated, I always start with the child. And as Froebelians, we always start with the child. But some further reading I draw on to support this thinking with educators is from Professor Tina Bruce, who explains what children can do rather than what they cannot do as a starting point in a child's education. Additionally, she asserts, begin where the learner is, not where you want them to be or they ought to be. The focus is on what children can do, and it's not about a deficit. And I think that helped us get a deeper understanding of what we actually mean by starting with a child. We move on to the next slide, please. Again, freedom with guidance links really well. Froebel's notion of freedom was not a laissez-faire for children to do anything. Drawing on the work of Helen Tovey, who shares, freedom can only operate within a framework of responsibility and respect for others, the resources in the natural environment. Therefore, adults' guidance is central to Froebel's notion of freedom, when the educator's role is to sensitively guide. And Tovey's pamphlet we used quite a bit, the Froebelian Principles in Practice, has offered a really good staple read for us to kind of discuss that element within it around about freedom with guidance. And we use that to reflect and understand what this means in our own communities and what that concept means for us. And that's been really useful. So moving on to the next slide, something I feel has been really important part of this journey also is how slow pedagogy lines with our national guidance. And if we draw on the Froebelian principle of unity and connectedness, it helps us learn how everything links and everything is interconnected. And I know not everybody on this call is Scottish. However, if you examine your national guidance, I'm almost certain there will be elements that make links. Start with what you can find that makes links rather than saying what doesn't make links. We'll move on to the next slide. We can see here what kind of slow pedagogy look like in practice, and we've given some examples here of reflections from the project. But initially, when we started to learn about slow pedagogy through Froebelian principles, the initial practice findings showed it was predominantly the adult's perspective. It wasn't rather than a child's. However, through CPD, we've done professional reading, workshops, and time to have honest reflection to see how this is transferring into the day-to-day practice. And if not, what could we do to further develop this? You can see some examples on the slide. Therefore, thinking about what was discussed in the last slide about national guidance, the Froebelian slow pedagogy can align to and advocate for children's rights as defined through the UNCRC. In Scotland, this is incorporated into law with the UNCRC Act 2024, came into force in July of this year. Next slide, Alison. Then again, Alison's touched on this as well, and you'll read it in the pamphlet too, the 4 key themes of slow pedagogy. But I wanted to reflect and understand how this interconnects with the Froebelian principles in practice. Being with sounds like something that we do all the time. However, we discovered there were lots of times during the nursery session that educators could value being with children, individual children, more. It also highlighted when educators were thinking of completing tasks, there was less being with on the child's agenda. It was more on the educator's agenda focused. This is when we used the Froebelian principles to complete factual reflection through using the iPads to record and view short practice videos. These were extremely powerful and supported educators making positive changes in practice. For example, within the sewing space, it created wider perspective of inclusion, experiences, and what was the offer for every child. For some children, it was a sensory experience of exploring textiles or having a safe object to flow, such as a pom-pom, through their trajectory schema. For others, it was the opportunity to sew and create using fabrics. I think another key point to mention here as well regards to being with, there was a key consistent finding in relation to being with children, where educators feel this happens more naturally when outdoors, particularly when off-site in nature. We'll move on to the next slide. So moving on, we can provide an example of going off track. And going off track can have a literal and a metaphorical meaning. And here is the literal meaning I've suggested to share. So findings showed initially educators would not be embracing opportunities of getting to a destination and the rich experiences this can offer. But moving forward, educators became more attuned to the children's journey and not just the destination. You can see on this photo slide, this is a large hill in our local woodlands, and it is a very steep and challenging hill, not just for children, for adults also. However, if you go off track and away from the pathway and choose this route, it opens up a whole new experience. And when at the top, children can view their world from a different perspective. We'll move on and have a look at diving deep. And within our pamphlet, there is some work, some written work to share, what we've done around woodwork. And through the slow woodwork funding that we've been looking at through our project that's currently happening, this enabled educators to focus on these experiences and reflect how this is happening for each child. It supported understanding the interconnectedness of wood and the real life experiences even before they begin to even use a tool. That tool talks and how woodwork is a slow process, and when we learn that each tool has got a purpose, we understand that different types of wood, we understand that balsa wood is a softwood before moving on to whitewood. And our observations reflected children at these experiences are deeply engaged. And many children will move on to create what they want to make, and educators are knowledgeable as they draw on their skills gained from Peatmoor House CPD and continue as a setting to learn through woodwork together. And I think it's that important part that we don't just stop once you've done the CPD, it's the continual reflection and learning together. Moving on, we'll have a little example of taking the longer view. And this could be around learning for sustainability, which Alison mentioned and touched on earlier. And something we have certainly focused on is nurturing autonomy in unhurried mealtimes. Slow food experiences through seed to plate, discovering where food comes from, and enabling children to be involved in that whole process of growing, cooking, and eating the food to support healthy relationships with food. Selecting their own food has shown greater volumes of children trying different types of food and less wastage of food. Just as Froebel intended, through being involved in the first-hand experiences, we see how these transfer into play, and through children choosing when they want to come for lunch, enables the child to have more choice and autonomy. So moving on, what difference can this make, or what difference is it making? I've documented here a few reflections, and I believe it's important to make visible the positive impacts and differences in each community. I'll share with you one example of the reflection. This is a setting reflecting together. The slow pedagogy attunes to every child's here and now and prevents systems such as routines and the future to influence agendas. Starting from where the child is at supports an inclusive approach, particularly in continuous provision. What is every child's offer with core resources? Next slide, please. You may wish to look over or revisit some of these slides. I understand I've got more information, but in recordings available, it might be useful to reflect again. So before I pass back over to Alison, I would like to share a takeaway where the QR code enables access to the pamphlet and the Falkirk Froebel Trust Slow Pedagogy film. Along with attending webinars and training events, I've found it really helpful within nurseries to have a guide, cascade and share some key messages which can be easily accessed and used with everyone, families, educators, students. And just like children, I find it very beneficial to revisit learning. And as Froebelians, the value of reflection and lifelong learning is key to being a knowledgeable, nurturing educator. I'll pass back over to Alison.
Thank you, Donna. So I'm just going to end with some final thoughts. I'd like to mention the work of Michelle Boulos-Walker here, because she's written recently a book called Slow Philosophy, Reading Against the Institution. And she says, slow, it's chosen to counter a speed and haste that threatens the very culture of deep thought. And I think this is why it's so important for us to be talking about these issues, because children need the opportunities to be in a community that develops deep thought. And we need that too as lifelong learners. And Boulos-Walker continues, quoting Cilliers, she says, the argument is against unreflective speed, speed at all costs, or more precisely against speed as a virtue in itself, against the alignment of speed with notions like efficiency, success, quality, and importance. So it's this unreflective speed which I think needs to be challenged. So it's time for a reset. And we would like you to take away these questions to kind of reflect on. What would leaning more towards slowness look like in your context? Where would you begin, or where next for you? And then what new possibilities might this open up for young children with various different skills and abilities and needs, for educators, and for early childhood education students? Here is the cover of our pamphlet that you can tell we're very, very proud to have been able to put together, and we've acknowledged it's very hard work writing a pamphlet, so we're really delighted that it's already being used. And just to end with our thanks. Huge thanks to everyone involved in these slow pedagogy projects, and discussions, including educators, early years support teams and children in Falkirk, Orkney, Shetland, Iceland, Australia, and New Zealand. Thank you for listening.
Alison and Donna, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring and wonderful work that really is making a difference to so many children in Scotland. Donna, the work you're doing, and of course across the world in lots and lots of different places. I just want to remind people to please add any questions into the Q&A. I've noticed one or two in the chat, and the chat's spinning so fast that it's really, really hard to keep up. There was some really nice collaboration going on in the chat around being with children and that kind of being a companion, doing things together with children, and intergenerational, and children with children, and really, really nice. But please do pop questions into the chat. We've had one, and I mean, either of you can answer this. It might sit more with Donna. And the question is, do you find it's harder to implement this kind of pedagogy with children who have special educational needs and disabilities, as there's such a focus on measurable targets and time-orientated adult-led goals?
I would say no. I think this work has really helped us look and take the time that we need to take as educators to really observe how children are what they're using. So for example, the stone space in particular, that was just one example I've gave, but if we look at all our spaces, it should be an offer for everyone. And really, by taking that time to be reflective, observe, we can really see what stage or where each child, that starting point from where they're at, and going back to what Tina was saying, not seeing them as a deficit, seeing them as the person that they are, the little individual person that they are, and start from where they're at. So I think it's important that we start with where each individual child is, instead of trying to follow what they were maybe seen as being a struggle. So I suppose it depends why are we setting up children to fail with using something that's maybe not appropriate for every child. So hopefully that's helped to answer a little. Maybe Alison, if you've got anything.
I think I'd add to that, Donna, that I think it's an interesting question, because often children who do have unidentified special need, often their time is much more measured and fragmented, and as I say, a lot of adult activities, and yeah, maybe there's also a question of what they're missing because of doing that. So yeah.
And I think as
their time,
as you said in the presentation, it's that Froebelian principle of, you know, starting where the child is at, starting with the child.
Yeah, and that's freedom of guidance, I think, is really important, something that we've been working on in Falkirk as a whole. Education early years is really to figure out yourselves, because we have to understand that some children can't have the freedom because they need the sensitive adult to guide, and lots of children with additional needs may need that. They may need freedom at times, but at other times they may need you to have that professional autonomy to enable them to be supported in the way that's right for them.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. There was another question which did come into the chat, and I spotted in the speed, and it was asking about whether you've had the opportunity to share this work with parents. So I think maybe both of you might be able to speak to that.
Do you want me to start first?
Well, yes, I just love the example from Donna. I know she'll be able to tell us more, but about realizing how important to explain to parents what you're doing and why, and I think to sort of take parents along with you, because sometimes people say to me, but I like this slow stuff, but I worry about my children missing out. And so I think the challenge is to be able to show that slow is not an end point, it's about what it makes possible.
Yeah, and I think there was some in our early projects, it was the connection with the families and even the educators at the time, the way in which we document And we had drawn on some of the work from Lynn McNair around the live stories, and really tried to document it in that way, because sometimes it wasn't quite fitting into a curriculum, and being able to document in a nice open way that you wrote to the child was a really nice way to connect for all children. And I remember at that point the educators being really quite touched, and thinking, oh, that's lovely, can we share that with the family? And of course. So again, it's that bit about the parents like that, and that setting did move on to change their way that they documented, because it connected so much to the child that it was meaningful to them, where they felt like the old style was more meaningful to the curriculum and for them as educators. So that really moved that forward, and I think that was a lovely way for the community to really see how slow pedagogy was supporting. And it might have even been things like they were transferring, so from these real life experiences, they were transferring that into the play. So through the live story, we were able to document that, and it was really being noticed how the child was having the autonomy and some of the language that they were able to put in the reflections as well. So that was quite nice. They started to understand the language, and it was a joint shared language within the community rather than seeing it as something different.
And of course, that's that real Froebelian approach, isn't it, of working really closely with your community, not seeing the community as separate from the work that you're doing daily in your services, but making that kind of translation for parents who don't necessarily have the edu-speak and, you know, don't necessarily use the acronyms that we use or the kind of curricular language, but translating across. Fantastic, thank you. I've got a really interesting sort of a question. So this one is saying, hi Alison and Donna, thank you so much for a fantastic lecture. I'm a level 5 student doing my early years degree at Kingston University, and part of my project is to hold an exhibition, and my class has chosen to look at your wonderful work on slow pedagogy. What would you recommend being our key focus when exhibiting your work?
Oh, wow. What a fantastic question. I don't know whether I can answer it. Okay. I think, well, I would love to see an exhibition about how children enjoy spending their time. And maybe we would learn, I think we've got so much to learn from children about that, and how we can then work better with children and time. So I guess maybe something in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's about being creative, isn't it? And yeah.
And maybe thinking about who's your audience, you know, as well, because that sometimes you want to be interactive with the audience, you want it to be well received too. So maybe, not sure if it says anything, like who would it be to students, or would it be to...
Not really sure, perhaps, yeah, perhaps it is to other students and other educators.
And I might have misunderstood that, because I was thinking going to a class and asking them, but I can see, okay, if you were making an exhibition of slow pedagogy, well, I think their interpretations of those 4 key themes would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I would quite like to see that exhibition.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to kind of put together, which are really about kind of managing slow pedagogy in a classroom, and does slow pedagogy mean slow learning, and also about managing the tensions between slow pedagogies in early year settings with the push for school readiness and for children entering primary school in a very unslow environment. So I suppose something about those sort of tensions.
Do you want to start, Alison? Or
Shall I start? And then, yeah, so if I take the one about transition and school readiness, because I think there's quite a lot in this subject about thinking about time, about how we don't always keep the focus on what children need to be doing next, and sort of miss out on the richness of the present. And I think sometimes in a very structured school readiness program, that we can actually take away some of the joy about being 3 and 4, and if the focus is all around going to school. So I think that's one side of it. I think there is also an element of how to think from the children's perspective about, can that whole process of transition be approached in a more child-focused way, which needs more time for reflecting from the child's point of view about what that actually feels like.
Yeah, I just want to add in as well, because we have just done a lot of discussions around this. You know, Falkirk has got Play is the Way as an early level. We have got our realising ambition, but we've still got challenges as well, because obviously there is still a school readiness, and we're trying to shift that conversation to talk about school being ready for children and how's that meaningful for children. So I think it's slowing it down and understanding. We use a what matters to me approach, or an enhance what matters to me approach, and that's going to hopefully support moving on to school as well. So rather than just being about a report coming to a school, what does it actually mean for children? What is the most important thing to them currently at their nursery? And how could we then take that forward in the school? So if they're predominantly spending a lot of time at block play, maybe woodwork, sewing, is that going to be translated? So I know there's 24 children, but maybe when you look at all their what matters to me and start to map it out and see, well, what matters to each individual child, and collectively, what can we have in the class that would maybe really support that learning through play, opposed to thinking what we're going to do to them, going back to that agenda of what do we do with children rather than to. So maybe thinking it in their lines, trying to flip it round and think of it from the child's perspective and lens.
Yes, and sometimes it's that thing of actually really following the lines of learning, and children will actually learn more when they're leading their learning than when it's our kind of rushing them through pre-planned objectives. There's another question here about how you see the development of literacy or reading in terms of slow pedagogy. Do you have any evidence yet to support language acquisition and the benefits of slowing down and building on what children can do?
I think this is a very rich area open to further research, and I think, you know, to think about it through a slow lens adds another dimension to the research that's already in this area. But I think, for example, an example I saw recently from my visits in Australia, an emphasis on children in early childhood centres being able to write their own stories and develop them and share them. And I think that's an idea of a kind of how children can be given the time to sort of to come up with their ideas, to actually you be able to validate them, make a book with them, and for it to grow. So I think there's that element of a sort of how to be slow with a story idea with children. And also there's the element of how to support children who are coming in with their first or second or maybe even third language sometimes. And I think a less hurried approach will be an advantage for those children.
Definitely. I'd like to just add in, even definitely with the storytelling and being creative with that, and not just seeing it from a book, thinking about different ways, the journey, even the story stick, you know, there's so many different ways that you can think of. Just that slow approach within your environment from a practical perspective as an educator, but also that slow singing, do you know, that repeat, that repetition that young children need, the rhyming, the alliteration, the songs, and we often call it in practice maybe song of the moment, for example. So rather than just moving on to the next, what are we doing with the one song to really help? And that should support children with additional languages too, or maybe speech and language input. Do you know, it's that bit about slowing it down and really thinking about how maybe they could learn one song instead of trying to help them learn 10 songs. Start with one and start to build that. And sometimes we've noticed even like spoon signifiers, singing spoons, or toys that supports having their little props, Humpty Dumpties, to go along with the song. And it's often through play rather than everybody come and sit down. Through play, how are we singing songs? And using opportunities throughout the day to connect in different ways, just, you know, mother songs, family songs. It is a pedagogy, but sometimes it's maybe not as rich in some settings as in others. So I think it's important to really do a lot of singing.
I love that you say that. Lots of singing. Wonderful. That's what we do. We do need lots of singing.
Could I just come back on an earlier point when we were talking about the language that we use? And I noticed in the chat, Nikki Buchan said, well, maybe we should use the phrase slow, deep learning. And I think, slow, deep, unhurried learning. I think there's work to be done, I think, on the vocabulary that we use to talk about these issues, and finding ways to describe it that, enable us to do this important work, and not to trip up on the actual words.
Yes, it's that distinguishing, isn't it, between slow somehow meaning that children are not making progress, and that's not what slow means at all.
No, we need to reclaim that word, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. The questions are coming in thick and fast now, which is, I'm now trying to kind of put some of them together, because there are several ones. So there's several questions that have come in around primary classes or beyond early learning, and whether you have examples of where that's happening or how it might happen beyond. Somebody's put in, and I've lost the question now, but they were talking about slow pedagogy from early right through the whole lifespan. That actually is this a really sort of good thing for people, human beings?
Yeah. I think it would be fantastic if this discussion, this debate that lots of people are joining in could actually be a change to education across the board, really. And I think this draws on so many principles from Froebel, from the Reggio approach, if we're thinking about early childhood education and care, and John Dewey, and many, many others. So this isn't new, but it is about reclaiming. And I think our education system really needs it in many countries.
I think it links really nicely a lot of the work that we're doing, thinking of that mindfulness as well. And sometimes the slow sewing or the going out is really good for educators as well. And as Alison was discussing earlier, it's that permission sometimes. And it's the permission to really get an in-depth experience with children rather than feeling they're rushing. And it's sometimes just to be with the children is having a lot more positive impact on the educators, because they feel that is what they're there for. But sometimes they enable agendas or to-do lists to take over. But it is that bit that they are feeling mindfulness with it.
We've just got a really loud thunderstorm going on, so if I suddenly disappear at the end,
a blizzard, and we can't hear the thunder. We've just got a couple of minutes, and there was one question that I think would be a nice maybe one to sort of round up on, and the question's about the well-being of children. So they're asking about what have you noticed longitudinally about the well-being of the children, and have the children noticed or commented on this approach?
Probably touching on, I could probably share some of the work that we've done. Obviously, we've not done longitude, but the project work that we've done had showed an amazing difference with well-being when children were engaging in nature. And I think the difference from observing that indoors to outdoors, and that unhurried time, being out in nature and the engagement and the learning and the richness that was happening in comparison to indoors for some children, is certainly, I've noticed a huge difference with that. I don't know if you want to come in with any other. It's Alison.
Well, I think we can see that there have been so many advantages in terms of children's well-being. We do need to do more research together to sort of demonstrate it, but it ties in with many other bigger studies that have happened about what's the important features of children's well-being and how to create environments that sustain children.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I spotted something as the chat whizzed by about nature time and that kind of different time scale of nature in terms of sort of geology and formation of the world, and actually we are of this world and connected, and that kind of comes back to that whole concept of Froebelian unity. It is 8 o'clock. I think we could go on with this conversation for a really, really long time. The chat has been going like a fun fair, and it's just fantastic that people have been having conversations with each other, making those links and connections. But really just this is the opportunity for me to say thank you so much, Alison and Donna, for sharing your inspiring work with us tonight. And I know that people are going to go away inspired, hopefully are going to try things out in their settings, hopefully have made some new connections from this experience tonight, and definitely need to go and download your pamphlet and take it away and reflect on your work more deeply and further. And of course, Alison's book, if you really want to kind of dig in deep, is a great read. So thank you very much for being our speakers at the autumn lecture. Thank you to everyone who has joined us from across the world. I've counted, I think, at least 15 different countries that people have joined us from. And we hope this is not the last time that we see you taking part in an event with the Froebel Trust.
Thank you very much, Katrina.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.